Hi, this is Leili with In Vivo Leadership Strategies, and this is Integrity Over Scale podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Integrity Over Scale podcast. I am your host, Leili Sadaghiani. I want to talk to you about something really important and something that I'm very, very passionate about in my work as a coach, as a leadership coach. I want to talk about how we stop performing as a leader people expect us and start leading the way that we actually know how, being true to ourselves and who we are. This is a solo episode, and this is something that I know when I was leading in a corporate world, climate was really, really difficult for me even, because you are, as a leader, expected to do all sorts of things that should bring profits to the company. There's a moment I think a lot of us as leaders know very well, and it's this. You walk into a meeting, or you're logging to a call, or getting ready for a very difficult conversation with someone, and before you even open your mouth, something in you keeps trying to adjust to the political climate or the person that you're talking to. And it doesn't have to do with lying. And it's not about manipulating other people. It's because somewhere along the way, you've learned what leadership is supposed to look like. So your voice changes in that process. Your face changes in that process. You think I should look a certain way, and that's what you want to exhibit. You are very careful with how you show up to your audience. And you reach for certainty faster then you actually feel it. So you always aim to say the most polished thing instead of the true thing. I remember this was years ago when I was getting into a leadership position. I had interviewed and my mentor, and she called me because I passed for the last round of interviews. And it was because she really liked me. And she said, your answers are pretty good. They just feel a little polished. They feel like you've rehearsed it and it's perfected, where we really need to feel like more you in the interview process. That always stayed with me even till this day in my career, because that was when I was in my early 20s, and getting that kind of feedback, I felt like, wow, okay, great. I have polished ways of saying things. That's awesome. But in a way, it was a setback. Let's put it that way. I don't think it was a horrible thing. I think it was just a setback. And now, as a leadership coach, I understand that so well. And it's both in my research and in my coaching experience that I say this. Leaders do what I did in my interview process and, in meetings and how we show up automatically for so many years, that they stop noticing what they're doing completely. They think they're leading, but a lot of the time what they're actually doing is performing leadership, what we think we need to look like in that role. So today we're going to slow that moment down, and the moment you put that costume on, and because this episode is about the gap between the leader you've learned to perform and the leader you actually know how to be. And we'll talk about why that gap forms, what it costs you and your team, and what it actually takes to close it. Not with another leadership script or a way to perform or wear the right clothes, but with something a lot more honest. And what you'll learn, even more effective. So now I want to be careful and talk about where the performance comes from. I don't think most people do this because they're fake. Nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, well, how can I be more disconnected from people and myself today? That's not how it starts. It's usually the intention's always good, but it starts with adaptation. protection even. You're learning the room, you're trying to be this credible person, and you want to be taken seriously. Try to stay in the game, if you will. So those are all reasonable things that you and I worry about, especially if we work in a culture where we're constantly on survival mode. That's what we care about a lot, is to survive that environment. You've probably been also in meetings where someone was speaking with so much confidence that everybody just went with it. Even if the room quietly knew that that certainty was doing more work than substance. And you've probably also been in a room where someone had real insight, right? There's a real discernment, something very genuine and important that they say, but they didn't package it in the energy that leadership culture rewards it. So it got overlooked. And maybe that person was you. I can tell you time and time again, especially as a woman in the corporate world, this happened to me, and continuously, by the way, happens to me all the time. It's something that frustrates me as a person and as a leader and as someone who's been an expert in this field. But I want you to know these things don't happen randomly. There's actually good research language for this. So sociologist Irvin Goffman called it impression management. And this idea that we're all to some degree performing a version of ourselves for an audience. And Herminia Ibarra's work also on leadership identity, it showed that people don't just have a leadership style, they construct one. And it's usually by trying versions of leadership they've seen rewarded around them. So if you've seen someone who is hubristic and gets their way and has gotten rewarded in the company, more than likely that's what you will exhibit yourself because it's worked. So all of that to say is fine. That's how we learn. And this is where the problem starts. When the template is very narrowed. Because if the template is narrowed, then the performance is going to cost in the long run. I want to say this because people say, well, Leili, this type of leadership works in the corporate world. This type of leadership is influential in the corporate world. I really want to argue against that because in the short term, I totally agree. It could work. But what happens in the long term is that it stalls progress. It stalls people. You lose good people. The wrong people stay. I can keep going. This is the problem that I have with this type of thought process. Let's be honest about this template. A lot of leadership culture still over rewards visibility, certainty on cue, and a kind of polished confidence that reads as competence, whether or not it is competence. So if you see that, then you're going to adapt to that. That is over signal conviction. You rush to the answers, right? You sand off the parts of yourself that feel maybe too quiet because that leader has shown this exhibit of like hubristic ego. So if that adaptation goes on long enough, what happens is that it stops feeling like adaptation because it starts to feel like identity. And this is just who I am as a leader now. This is what credibility requires me to do in this environment, in this company. And that's where people get stuck. It doesn't have to do with being shallowed because the version of leadership that got awarded in one season of their life is now becoming the version they feel obligated to keep performing in every season after that. So I want to push and say a lot of individuals that I worked with, they feel like they have to abide by what's going on. And that's just how it goes. We feel like we have to be a certain way. There's one story that I heard where I went into this company, and this company was very male dominated. The woman in this room full of men felt like the only way that she could get promoted was to basically become the secretary in that meeting and click every time in the PowerPoint when someone talked and was ready to go to the next slide. That's unfortunately how she got promoted, because she okayed doing secretary work. And in a way, at least she knew what she wanted to do. But in other ways, why does she have to abide by something like that? Why does she have to be the secretary? And this is something that I repeatedly hear from women in a room. There was another client of mine. She was, an executive, and sat in the room and was asked continuously in several meetings to take notes. And finally, after practice, she went to them and she said, I would love to be more participatory in this meeting. Is there anybody else that can come and take notes? But even then, that felt awkward for her. So she had to warm herself up to say something like that in the 6th or 7th meeting that she was in with these individuals. Here's where I want to name something that's a little bit uncomfortable for us. So sometimes what gets called confidence is actually compliance with a cultural script. I'm also guilty of this as well, as I've seen certain individuals in my company exhibit confidence and people say, well, that looks confident. So I set up a meeting with them and I talk to them and I say, well, what makes you confident? And sometimes what gets called executive presence is emotional distance, but it has amazing lighting, kind of like the one that I have in the background right there. And sometimes what gets called decisive is actually, anxiety. It's moving fast so nobody notices the fear underneath it. I am a very anxious person. When I started leading, I led from anxiety. I am not ashamed to say this, and it was because the first company that I worked in as a leader, if I made the wrong call, if I made one little mistake, my higher ups will know about it. The power was given to this colleague of mine. So if I did something wrong, I was always there to serve this person. And if I did it wrong, this person would go higher up and talk about me. I got very good at reading people's emotions and being an empath in the office so that I can make sure that I don't make any mistakes so that no one from higher up calls. And I had gotten assigned someone who would look up to me. I became a mentor, in other words. And she asked me many, many a times, hey, how are you so decisive? How are you so good? How do you stay calm? And I answered her the only way that I knew how, which was, well, if I don't, I will hear about it. I have to make sure people are happy. But the real answer was because of my anxiety, because I was so fearful of losing my job. A lot of leaders are performing certainty when what they're actually feeling is pressure and what they could have strived in an environment with compassion. For me, it was human fear that if I don't perform a certain way, then I will lose my job. And even more so, I don't think I even had authority, even though I had at that time, in that example that I was sharing with you. But I felt like I was going to lose authority as well. This is where the ego steps in. And ego doesn't always show up as arrogance, believe it or not. But ego can also show up as protection, as the part of you that says, hey, if I can just stay composed enough, if I can be more impressive, unshakable enough, maybe I can keep control of how I'm seen. But control over how you're seen is not the same thing as leadership. And the longer those two get confused, the more disconnected your leadership becomes from reality. And here's why this matters so much. Okay? Performative leadership that we talk about, it can look incredibly polished, and it can leave everyone around it exhausted. The team feels the distance, first off, even when they can't name what they're seeing. If someone seems like they're unshaken, you're teaching your team how to be robots. So that's one. They feel when a leader is speaking from a script instead of from conviction, they're going to wonder how. They feel when the language about values is cleaner and the behavior underneath it is not really fully present. In other words, like it's performative, right? I am acting, this is a script, I'm reading the script. Intent doesn't erase impact. Performance does not create trust just because it's convincing. In fact, one of the quietest costs of performative leadership is that it breaks trust, believe it or not. And not through one big visible failure, and it's through repetition. The leader says the right thing, but people stop expecting follow throughs. The leader projects openness, but disagreement still has consequences for people. So people adjust, they get more careful, they get more strategic, more edited, and that means the leader gets the less of the truth, less challenge, or less reality. There was a project that I was helping, I was a consultant from a change management perspective, and it seemed to the executives that this project was on time with what the rollout was going to be for that specific technology. They were not present. I've done sponsorship work, sponsorship leadership coaching. They were not present. And the people in the project were really afraid to share what was exactly happening in that project, which was things were falling apart. It wasn't working out well. People were clashing and so forth. So one executive asked for an update meeting, and this project team realized they couldn't lie. They shared what was going on, and the executives were upset because how come they didn't know about this until today? And the answer to that is that executive team was very difficult to work with. If you brought them something that was bad, I'm putting quote unquote bad, it's just negative, the project maybe was going to delay and so forth, their reaction wasn't going to be a good reaction. It was coming from a very immature place, like a very low EQ place. So the project team learned, I will never bring things unless it's absolute. And this meeting that the executives placed was absolute. When we have something like this, what I want to do now is talk about power over versus power with. This is why I care so much about the difference between the performative versus the authentic. It's also a difference between power over power with. So let's talk about what power over is. Power over performs. It needs the room to keep confirming the story the leader is telling about themselves. Its power is just different. Now, if we compare that with power with, it's less invested in theater and it's more invested in the contact and the relationships and the connection. So it can tolerate not being the smartest sounding person in the room and questions and frictions and not knowing, because we don't know things. And it's okay if we don't. And it's legitimate. Because for me, I don't depend on maintaining a perfect image anymore, because I know what the truth is, and I need to make sure that I put the truth out there so I can do better, so people can do better, so we can develop better. That's a very different kind of confidence. And I think that we need to talk about it more, because our society rewards arrogance, anxiety, more than it rewards the truth. And this is especially true in the corporate world, because we are involved in this political game constantly. Confidence is not the problem. The problem is confidence that has fused itself to identity. So if your sense of self as a leader depends on always being the composed one, the clear one, what the thing that I used to hear constantly was like, do you know how calming you are in the room? And it made me laugh, because all I could think in those moments was I had anxiety all over my body. So if you are the one with the answers, then any moment that threatens that image starts to feel like it's something dangerous that happens. Your amygdala alarm continuously goes on, on, on. And once it feels dangerous, you stop responding to the situation and you start responding to the threat of self. Because now something is going to threaten how you're looking like. And so you have to respond to it. And usually we come from a place of, well, low road, where we constantly worry about our amygdala and the reactions that we have gets activated through our amygdala. That's when listening gets harder. That's when feedback lands at disrespect. And when other people's perspective starts to feel like obstacles versus they're just giving you information. There was another client that I worked with, and he would get stressed out anytime someone gave him any type of feedback because he would take it personally, whereas it was literally just information that was given to him. He wasn't being criticized for anything he was doing. It was just information that was being fed to him about what was happening in that moment. That's when leaders become more attached to being right than to getting it right. And that shift doesn't happen because someone became a monster. My favorite thing is to make leaders black and white. They're bad. This person's really bad. They're a human being. It happens because pressure narrows people. When we are facing pressure as leaders, we need to be careful because however our stressful situation is that we handle, it amplifies in stressful situations, in high-stake environments. This is why I care so much and I coach in high-stake environments. Status seduces people. Fear makes people protect the identity that once kept them very safe. And understanding why something happens doesn't mean excusing what it does. Human cost is very real. Human-centered approach is very important. It will not go anywhere. It is real. When leaders perform the role instead of inhabiting this leadership role, honestly, team starts working around them instead of with them. People edit themselves, like we talked about. They present cleaner version of problems. They wait until after the meeting to say what they really think. They even go to their friends and they say, oh, we're screwed. Like, I know I said all these things that were amazing, but hey, man, we're pretty much screwed. And every one of those moments, you know what it is? It's a loss. We don't have information. We lost information. We don't have trust. Collective intelligence is lost. And that is pretty darn sad in a leadership role to know that is happening around you. There's also a personal cost. And I don't think this is something leaders think about when they are in the performative phase. It's tiring. It's exhausting to perform this thing that we think is a leader all day long. You're adjusting your tone, your face, your posture, your visible level of control, all in the service of staying legible inside a narrow template of what leadership should mean. An example that I can share with you is I was asked to lead this big branch. The leader before me was pretty strict. I had higher ups come and visit me for a week just to welcome me, transition me into the position. And I met with them on a daily basis that week. In our last meeting, one of my leaders said, hey, Leili, we need a leader that needs to look like this, 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 and this. And it was none of those were me at all. None of the things that he had asked were me. We need him to be strict. We need him to be mean. We need him to be rough. We need him to be aggressive. Can you do those things? And I remember going like, you just say yes because you need to keep this job. So I said yes. And I went home and to be quite honest with you, I was tearful because I thought there's no way I can play this thing. I don't know who this person is they want me to be, but I can't be that. And the mentor that I shared in the beginning that told me, be yourself, be who you are. I had called her and I told her the feedback and she took a pause and said, Leili, you be who you need to be. There's no one else like you. You be you. Because she knew if I gave in to this, whatever characteristic they had, I would be constantly self-monitoring. I'd be exhausted. I would be playing this thing that I wasn't. And when that energy is going into managing your own image, there's less of it available for discernment, patience, creativity, actual thought, caring for your team. You're just constantly exhausting yourself. It's like micromanaging yourself. That's part of why some leaders are so polished in public and so brutal in private. They spent the whole day holding a performance together, and by the time something real reaches them, there's nothing flexible left. And she was right. I went in there, and it sounds horrible, but hey, some of us have this type of leader where I ignored what this leader had told me. They had left anyways, and I said, I need to do this the way I need to do it. And you know what? The type of leader that I was is exactly what this team needed. They performed better than they ever had. They outperformed other teams in the company, and they became one of the examples. And it didn't have to do with me. It's all about them. But what I did was just empower them to be who they are. So if you've made it through the visible part of your day, and you didn't do any of these, right? And then you felt strangely depleted, you were irritable, you were detached, I want you to sit with this question. How much of your energy is going into leadership, and how much of it is going into this performance of being a leader? That is not a small distinction. If you are feeling like you're performing, especially for introverts sometimes feel that way. So how about you just be who you are? How about you honor the best leader that you can be? I think there are a lot of leaders walking around with a form of success that doesn't fully belong to them. It's not about earning. I mean, they've earned it. What I'm talking about is their actual instincts. They're not letting those kick in. Their actual voice isn't being heard. How they read people, their capacity for pause, right? Their moral discomfort, all the things that might have not looked like leadership in the rooms that they've been trained for. I've worked with leaders that have been above me, and I wish that they didn't mirror the leaders above them. I could tell, for instance, there was this one leader that I worked with. I thought, man, he could be amazing. He could be fantastic. He has a love for his team. But I could also tell the leader above him feeding him lines. And every time he showed up differently, I could feel it in my chest. I could tell the trademark that was his boss. I was like, yeah, that's so-and-so talking now. It's not so-and-so that's sitting in front of me. Now I want to make a distinction here, because some people hear this kind of conversation and think, oh, so I should just say whatever comes to mind and don't filter. That's not what I'm saying. Conscious leadership requires judgment. We still require discipline. We require reading the room. We require that we care, right? But there's a difference between being intentional and this self-assurance. There's a difference between being thoughtful and this over-management that we have. Leadership shouldn't require you and me to become unrecognizable to ourselves. And if it does, something has gone wrong. So what does the shift actually look like that I'm talking about? How do you stop performing the leader they expect and then start leading the way that you actually know how? I think this begins with noticing your stage moments, the places where you can feel yourself putting the costume on. It always goes by self awareness. So maybe it's at a board meeting that you're sitting, it could be during a presentation. You feel like you have to say the right words with the audience that you have. It can also be around someone whose approval still has little too much power over you. I can share an example of this. There's a friend of mine that I admire so much. I think she's like the coolest person in the world. I hadn't seen her for a few years. Recently had dinner with her, and I just felt like I wanted to impress her. I wanted to be this cool version of myself. And so I was very aware that I was going to go into my performativeness, be this person that I really didn't recognize that I thought she may liked. I don't want you to rush past those moments when you have that self-awareness. I want you to get curious about it. What is it that you're protecting, right? What do you believe is going to happen if you show up a little bit more truthful of who you are? And what part of you are you hiding because you don't trust that this room is going to read it accurately and, more importantly, will approve it? Those questions matter because leadership change rarely starts with a technique. It starts with contact, and contact with what you're afraid of, with the difference between who you are and who you've been taught to perform. And sometimes it could also be that we're not taught that. It's just like we observe what's happening and we think, well, that's how we need to do it, which also is another way to be taught, right? Then comes value. And I mean real values, not the branding, not values as language on a website, but more of values as behavioral anchors. When I'm at my best, what am I actually protecting? What do I want people to experience? Especially when I have power. And what do I refuse to sacrifice even when the pressure rises? So for some of you, the answer will be fairness, right? To others, it's going to be clarity or courage or repair, right? Whatever it is, it's your answer. But it has to be specific enough that you can feel when you're aligned with what you want and where you're drifting. Because once you know your actual anchors, it gets a lot easier to spot the counterfeits. The certainty that's really fear, for instance. It could be decisiveness that's really just the urgency without the thought process behind it. You can also show calmness, but it's actually you shutting down. And this is where different kind of confidence becomes possible. Not confidence that says, I'm always right. This is a different confidence. It's you staying in contact with who you are and with other people. And especially with your reality. And especially because it's uncomfortable. This kind of confidence can say, I need more information. I can say, I missed that. I can be honest and say, hey, tell me that I'm not going crazy here. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? And it can say, I don't want agreement more than I want the truth. I love that last one because a lot of performative leadership is built around agreement. Yep, got it. Yep, sounds good. Yep, perfect. I hear myself say that quite often when I just know that this is not the environment where I need to fight it. Agreement as proof that the leader still has the room. But agreement isn't always a sign of trust. Sometimes it's a sign that people have learned what's unsafe to say, just like I had. So here's the practical shift that I want you to take. Start creating conditions where reality has a better chance of entering the room. So ask better questions. Ask questions in general. Don't worry if they sound dumb. The worst case scenario is they sound dumb, but speak later. Notice people who haven't spoken. Invite challenge before decisions get clarified. And when your reaction teaches people to withhold, repair it quickly. Nothing that I said is flashy. Nothing I said is going to make you feel like you're crazy. It's going to make you more trustworthy. Any leader that I meet, even outside of this leadership coaching, if I am in a meeting as a consultant, and leaders are asking questions, let's go back to the example. We're going to delay this rollout. We're going to do this. Okay, please walk me through what that means. How did we get to this decision? What were some ways that you didn't feel comfortable sharing this with us? How can we improve this process for you? Notice what you say, because you become more trustworthy, because you care enough to ask questions to understand what's going on rather than blame other people. And I take trustworthy over impressive every single time. And I know that your team will too. There's one more layer that I really want to name before we close, because without it, it's going to feel incomplete for me. For many people, especially people who've had to work very hard to be taken seriously in the first place, the pressure to perform leadership isn't just personal, it feels very systematic. So it's shaped by gender, by race, by class, by organizational culture, by who gets read as authoritative without effort and who has to work twice as hard to be seen as credible at all. This is an issue, and I've somewhat indirectly mentioned it during this podcast. So I'm not going to pretend everybody has equal freedom to just relax and be themselves at work. That's not true. I don't feel this way till this day. Some people are navigating real penalties, real misreadings, real double standards. There was one time where I was teaching a class of freshmen as a woman, as someone who's a little bit younger than they're used to. And the way that they talked to me as freshmen was very offensive. And then I had a male speaker come in and do a 1-hour presentation. He had more participations. He had more people being nice to him, more respected. It felt awful. I navigated that double standard, and I still navigate it till today. As a woman in this profession, and also someone who has a last name that's very hard to pronounce, comes from a very different place, believe me when I tell you, I feel it every single day. I'm trying not to tear up. Which is exactly why this conversation has to hold both systems and self. We don't help leaders by pretending the system doesn't shape performance. This is why I became a leadership coach. This is why I became a consultant, because I got sick and tired of people dealing with this crap. And we don't help them by surrendering all their agency at all. The environment matters, people. So if you're listening and thinking, yes, but there are reasons I learned to perform like so-and-so, I want you to say clearly this to yourself. You're right. I am right. And guess what? I believe you. Of course there are reasons. The question isn't whether the adaptation made sense. It doesn't make sense. I am struggling with it. I am still struggling with it. I am out of this corporate world and trying to help it, and I'm struggling outside of it. The question is whether it's still costing you more than it's protecting you. It was costing me more when I was leading that way. And I was actually talking to my friend this morning about how if I was still in that position, I would be 30 pounds heavier and I would be mentally ill. It's costing you more. It's not protecting you anymore. That's a different question when you ask that type of question. Is it whether it's still costing you more than it's protecting you? And it's a much more useful question for you, because sometimes the strategy that got you into the room is not the one that will let you lead honestly once you're there. Sometimes what's kept you safe starts keeping you distant. And sometimes what looked like credibility starts becoming a barrier to contact. When this happens, the work isn't to become careless. I hear this all the time. I've had enough. I'm learning through this job that it's better if I'm emotionless. I'm just not going to care. I'm just going to coast, going to do the bare minimum before I quit. Look, it's to become more conscious. Conscious over ego, humanity over power. This is the work. And you know what? If it was easy, then we would all do it. This is hard. This action that I want you to do is hard. And it's so hard for me. And if you're watching this, my apologies, you're probably seeing tears near the close of my podcast. But this is hard. This world today, this time in June 2026, is a very difficult thing to go through. So if I could say this directly to the leader who feels the strength of all of this like I do, here's what I'm going to say to you. You don't need to become louder to become more credible. I've had it in my feedback where, oh, I can't wait for you to talk some more. It's a room full of men. They all have opinions. Do you really think you need another one? You don't need to become harder to become more respected. And you definitely don't need to imitate the leadership style that got rewarded in someone else's body, in someone else's context, in someone else's generation. Influence is not volume, my friends. An authority that depends on constant performance is going to be a lot more fragile than it looks. I want to leave you with this question. What would it look like to stop asking, do I look like a leader right now? What if you ask something else? I want you to shift this and ask this. Am I leading in a way my values can live with? Maybe this week, the work is small. Maybe it's noticing one moment where you're performing confidence you don't actually feel. Maybe it's pausing instead of filling the silence. You ask one more question before you assert to your answer. You say, yep, got it, agree. Maybe it's just paying attention to the version of you that shows up when you're not trying so hard to look like a leader. Because that version of you, that version knows a lot more than you think it does. Can impact the world more than you think it does. Can be the voice of change more than you think it does. And right now you're abiding by someone because they are egotistically running that darn branch, running that darn company. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I hope you got something out of this podcast. And until next time, please keep choosing your conscious over ego and humanity over power. This is integrity over scale. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe so you can hear other future episodes. I have more guests coming on. I have a co-host that I'll bring on board, and I'm really excited about that. All in all, I care about you. I love you all. I really do. This work is really, really difficult. I would not do it if I didn't care about what I was doing. Thanks so much.